They say blood is thicker than water, but on a cold Tuesday night in October in a nowhere town tucked between the mountains and the rain, a 17-year-old boy proved that courage is thicker than both. He lay bleeding on the floor of a roadside diner, his life draining out of him in a dark river across the linoleum because he stepped in front of a girl he had never met before. He did not know her name. He did not know her story. And he certainly did not know that the phone call she made with trembling, blood-slicked hands was not to the police. It was to her father. And by the time the sun crested the ridge over the quiet town of Brierwood, Oregon, the police were the least of the town's worries. Because the horizon was not glowing with sunlight, it was glowing with chrome. 200 Iron Saints were coming, and they were not coming to visit. But before the thunder, before the army of leather and steel descended on a town that had never seen anything louder than a 4th of July parade, there was a boy, and there was a girl. And the boy was invisible. Caleb Wren had been invisible his entire life. Not in the supernatural sense, in the worst sense. The kind where people look right through you like you are a window they are trying to see past. He was 17 years old. He worked the graveyard shift at Pop's Diner on the edge of Brierwood, Oregon, 4 nights a week. He made $7.25 an hour, plus whatever tips the insomniacs and truckers left behind, which was almost never more than loose change and silence. He was tall and thin, with shaggy brown hairs that fell over his eyes like a curtain he was hiding behind. He wore the same rotation of 3 flannel shirts over white undershirts that his mother bought from the thrift store in Medford every September. His sneakers had holes near the toes. His hands smelled permanently of fryer grease and industrial soap. He had a quiet voice and a habit of looking at the floor when adults spoke to him, not because he was shy exactly, but because he had learned early that the world paid more attention to you when you were not asking it to. His mother, Nora Wren, was a small woman with tired eyes and hands rubbed red from years of hard work. She held 2 jobs: nights at the hospital, laundry feeding sheets and towels into machines that hissed and rumbled through the dark hours. Days cleaning houses on the east side of town, scrubbing bathrooms and mopping floors for families who left cash on the kitchen counter and never learned her last name. She had raised Caleb alone since he was 9 years old, since the morning his father climbed into the family's Ford Taurus and drove away without a word, without a note, without even the dignity of a goodbye. The car came back 6 months later, abandoned in the driveway with a blown transmission and a busted head gasket like a final insult wrapped in rusted metal. His father did not come back with it. Caleb had been trying to fix that car ever since. Every Saturday morning, rain or shine, he was in the driveway with a socket wrench and a second-hand Haynes manual pulling apart the engine piece by piece and putting it back together. The neighbors thought it was a hobby. Nora thought it was therapy. Caleb knew the truth that neither of them would say out loud. He believed in some deep, irrational corner of his heart that if he could fix the car, he could fix everything. That if the engine turned over, maybe the world would turn over too. Maybe the emptiness his father had left behind would fill in like a pothole patched with fresh asphalt. Maybe his mother would stop working 2 jobs. Maybe the house would stop feeling like a place where someone was always missing. It never turned over, but he kept trying every Saturday, every week, because Caleb Wren did not know how to quit on something, even when the something had already quit on him. Brierwood was the kind of town that existed in the margins. It sat in a valley between 2 ridges of the Cascade foothills, surrounded by dense Douglas fir forests that pressed in on all sides like dark green walls. The main street was 4 blocks long. There was a hardware store run by a man named Gus, who had been old for as long as anyone could remember. There was a barber shop with a striped pole that had not spun since the motor burned out in 1998. There was a white clapboard church with a bell that rang at 6 every morning, and a bar called the Rusty Nail that closed at 10 on weeknights because there was nobody left to drink past 10. The population sign at the edge of town read 2,847, but that was optimistic. Half the houses on the back roads had been empty since the mill closed in 2003. The young people left for Portland or Eugene or anywhere that had a future. The old people stayed because they had nowhere else to go. Brierwood was a town that time had forgotten and progress had skipped over, a place where the most exciting thing in recent memory was the high school football team making the state quarterfinals 2 years ago. They lost by 31 points, but the town still talked about it like it was the moon landing. Pop's Diner sat at the edge of town where Route 9 met the 2-lane highway that led to everywhere else. It was a squat, flat-roofed building with aluminum siding that had once been white and was now the color of old teeth. A neon sign buzzed in the rain. 24 hours. The H in hours was burned out, giving the sign a lopsided, tired look that matched the building perfectly. Inside, the floor was checkered, black and white, scuffed, and stained by decades of boots and spilled coffee. The boots were red, vinyl cracked with age, the foam padding showing through like wounds. A jukebox sat in the corner, unplugged, gathering dust. The air always smelled the same: burnt coffee, industrial cleaner, and the faint, permanent ghost of bacon grease that had seeped into the walls and the ceiling tiles and the very bones of the building. That was where Caleb was standing on Tuesday night when the girl walked in. Sloan Mercer was 16 years old, and she had been on the road for 3 weeks. 3 weeks since she walked out of a life most people would kill for, and most people would never understand. Her father was Magnus Mercer. They called him Iron Jaw. He was the founding president of the Iron Saints Motorcycle Club, a man who commanded an army of riders who would lay down their lives at a single word from his mouth. He was 6 feet 4 inches tall, with a beard like steel wool and arms thick as oak branches covered in ink that told stories of roads traveled and debts paid and a life lived entirely outside the lines that normal people drew around themselves. He was rich, powerful, feared in 11 states, and respected in all 50. He had given Sloan everything a girl could want: a roof over her head, food on the table, men who would protect her with their last breath. Everything except a choice. Sloan did not want the leather. She did not want the clubhouse with its stale smoke and its whispered conversations that stopped the moment she entered a room. She did not want the armed escorts to school the way her classmates looked at her with a mixture of fascination and fear, the way teachers never called on her because they did not want trouble with her father. She did not want the way grown men twice her size would avert their eyes when she passed, not out of respect for her, but out of fear of him. She did not want to be a princess in a kingdom built on gasoline and silence. She wanted to choose her own life. She wanted to be ordinary. She wanted to walk into a room and be nobody's daughter, nobody's leverage, nobody's responsibility. She wanted to disappear. So she left. She packed a bag, emptied her savings account of $1,400, and caught a Greyhound out of Reno at 4 in the morning while her father slept in the room down the hall, unaware that the most important thing in his world was slipping out the back door with a duffel bag and a one-way ticket to nowhere. She ditched her phone in a trash can in Sacramento. She cut her hair short in a gas station bathroom in Medford, watching the dark strands fall into the sink like pieces of the life she was leaving behind. She was going to become nobody. But the road had other plans. 3 weeks of cheap motels, cold bus stations, and meals made of vending machine crackers had turned $1,400 into $23. Her clothes smelled like diesel and stale coffee. She had blisters on her feet from boots that were never made for walking boots, that had been designed for standing on the foot pegs of a motorcycle, not for trudging through bus stations and rain-soaked parking lots. And then at a Greyhound stop in Portland, she made a mistake that would change everything. She grabbed the wrong bag. It was a simple error. The bags looked identical. Black nylon duffel, no name tag, the kind of generic luggage that 1,000 travelers carried through 1,000 bus stations every day. She slung it over her shoulder and walked off the bus without a second thought, her mind already on the next stop, the next cheap motel, the next step in her disappearance. It was not until she was 2 hours south, sitting in the bed of a pickup truck she had hitched a ride in, watching the Oregon pines blur past in the gray afternoon light, that she unzipped it and found what was inside. It was not her clothes. It was not her toothbrush and her dog-eared copy of East of Eden. Inside were bundles of cash, thousands of dollars, wrapped tight in rubber bands stacked in neat rows like bricks. And beneath the cash, taped to the lining of the bag with strips of clear packing tape, a small black flash drive in a plastic case. Sloan stared at it. Her hands began to shake. She knew with the instinct of a girl who had grown up in the shadow of the outlaw world, who had seen men pass envelopes under arbels and speak in codes that she was never supposed to understand, that she was holding something that could get her killed. She did not plug in the flash drive. She did not count the money. She zipped the bag shut and got out of the truck at the next stop, a gas station in the middle of nowhere with 2 pumps and a flickering fluorescent light above the door. She was going to leave the bag. She was going to walk away and let someone else deal with whatever dark gravity lived inside that black nylon shell. But she could not, because if someone was looking for this bag, they would trace the Greyhound manifest. They would find the pickup driver. They would follow the trail of a girl with short hair and a leather jacket, and they would find her. The only way to stay safe was to keep moving and figure out what she was carrying so she could figure out how to give it back without ending up in a shallow grave somewhere in the Oregon woods. That was how Sloan Mercer ended up in Brierwood, Oregon at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night with a flat tire, $23, a stolen bag full of secrets, and absolutely no one in the world to call. Her Sedan, a $1,500 beater she had bought with cash in Eugene, had blown a tire on Route 9 coming into town. She had limped it into the parking lot of the only place with lights still on. The neon sign buzzed in the rain, and through the smeared glass of the windshield, she could see the warm yellow glow of the diner interior. A figure moved behind the counter. One customer sat in a booth near the window, an old man with white hair working on a piece of pie. Sloan sat in the car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel. The rain drummed on the roof, streaking the windshield. She looked at the bag on the passenger seat. She looked at the flat tire. She looked at the $23 in her wallet. Then she pulled the hood of her oversized leather jacket over her head, grabbed the bag, and walked into the diner. The bell above the door chimed with a tired little jingle. Behind the counter stood Caleb. His name tag said his name. He was wiping down the counter with a rag that looked like it needed its own cleaning. The old man in the booth was Peyton, a retired postal worker who came in every Tuesday for cherry pie and silenced two things Brierwood had in abundance. Caleb did not look up immediately when the door chimed. He was used to the sound. The occasional trucker hauling lumber down from the mountains. The odd insomniac who could not sleep and did not want to be alone. The rare lost traveler who had taken a wrong turn off the interstate and ended up in a town that was not on most maps. They came, they ordered coffee, they left. Nobody stayed in Brierwood on purpose. But when he did look up, something made him pause. He stopped wiping. The rag went still in his hand. The girl who had walked in was young, maybe 16, with short dark hair that looked like it had been cut in a hurry, uneven around the edges, sticking up in places where the scissors had not been steady. She wore a leather jacket at least 2 sizes too big for her, the sleeves hanging past her knuckles, battered combat boots that were dark with rain. She carried a black duffel bag slung over one shoulder, and the weight of it pulled her frame to one side like a ship listing in rough water. But it was her eyes that stopped him. They were sharp, storm cloud blue, and they moved across the room with a precision that was almost military. She scanned the corners, the exits, the old man in the booth, the hallway to the restrooms. She clocked everything in 2 seconds flat, the way someone does when they have been trained or when they have been hunted. Sloan slid into a booth near the back, positioning herself so she could see both the front door and the hallway to the restrooms. She set the bag on the seat beside her, one hand resting on it like she was protecting something precious or something dangerous. She did not take off her jacket. Caleb walked over with a menu and a glass of water. The menu was laminated and sticky, the edges curling with age. "Black coffee," Sloan said. Her voice was steady but quiet, the voice of someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible. "And fries if you have them." "We always have fries," Caleb said. He paused. She was not looking at him. She was watching the parking lot through the window, watching the rain come down in silver sheets against the neon glow. "Rough night," he said. It was the most he had said to a customer in weeks. He was not sure why he said it. Maybe because she looked the way he felt most days. Alone, tired, and a long way from anywhere that mattered. Sloan looked up at him. For a second, something shifted behind those guarded eyes. A flicker of surprise, maybe. Or recognition. The recognition of one invisible person seeing another. Two people who had spent their lives being overlooked, suddenly visible to each other in the fluorescent glow of a diner that smelled like burnt coffee and forgotten dreams. "Just passing through," she said. She was not just passing through. Caleb could see the flat tire from the window, the sedan sitting crooked in the parking lot like a wounded animal. But he did not push it. He went back to the counter, poured her coffee, black no sugar, and dropped a basket of fries in the oil. The oil sizzled and popped a sound as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. For a few minutes, the diner existed in its usual state of quiet suspension. Rain on the roof, hum of the refrigerator, sizzle of the fryer. Old Peyton turned a page of his newspaper. The clock on the wall ticked its slow, steady rhythm. The world outside was dark and wet, and the world inside was warm and small, and for those few minutes nothing bad could reach them. Caleb brought Sloan her coffee and fries. She wrapped both hands around the mug like she was trying to absorb the warmth through her skin, like she had not been warm in a long time. "Your tire is flat," Caleb said, setting down the fries. "I know, I have got a jack in the back. I can take a look when my shift is over if you want." Sloan really looked at him for the first time. She studied his face with those careful eyes reading him the way she had been taught to read people, looking for the angle, the motive, the hidden agenda. He was skinny, a little awkward with kind eyes behind all that hair. He was offering to help a stranger at midnight in the rain, and he was doing it because he did not know how not to. There was no angle. There was no motive. He was just a boy who saw someone who needed help and could not look the other way. "You do not have to do that," she said. "I know," Caleb said, and he almost smiled. It was a small thing, barely a twitch at the corner of his mouth, but it was real. It was the most honest expression she had seen on a human face in 3 weeks. He went back behind the counter. Sloan ate her fries, slowly sipping her coffee. For the first time in 3 weeks, the knot in her chest loosened just slightly. There was something about this place, this sad little diner, in this forgotten town, this boy with his dish rag and his quiet kindness that made her feel like she could breathe. That feeling lasted exactly 4 minutes. The bell above the door chimed again, and the air in the diner changed. It was not a sound. It was a shift, like the barometric pressure dropping before a storm, like the moment before lightning strikes, when every hair on your body stands on end and the air tastes like copper. Sloan felt it before she saw it. Her hand moved instinctively to the bag beside her. 4 men walked in. They were not locals. They were older mid-20s wearing expensive streetwear that looked absurdly out of place in a diner that smelled like burnt grease in desperation. 2 of them were thick, heavy-set, with the flat-eyed look of men who had done ugly things and would do them again without hesitation. The third was wiry and twitchy, his eyes darting around the room like a rat looking for an exit. But it was the 4th man who made Sloane's blood turn to ice. He was lean with sharp cheekbones and a tattoo of a scorpion crawling up the side of his neck. His eyes were dead, not angry, not cruel, just empty, like a shark's eyes, like looking into 2 holes where a soul should have been. He moved with a lazy confidence, hands in the pockets of his black jacket, a smirk pulling at the corner of his mouth. The smirk of a man who enjoyed fear the way some people enjoyed music. His name was Rafferty. He spotted Sloan immediately. His smirk widened into something that was almost a smile but had none of a smile's warmth. "Well, well." His voice was slick and mocking, the kind of voice that inflicted fear the way some people inflicted bruises casually and with pleasure. The little runaway princess. Sloan did not scream. She did not run. She had been raised in a world where fear was a weapon, and showing it was the same as handing someone a loaded gun. She set her coffee down slowly and gripped the edge of the table until her knuckles went white. "Leave me alone, Rafferty." Her voice was flat, controlled. "I told you people I am done. You do not get to be done, sweetheart." Rafferty stepped closer. The other 3 men fanned out behind him, blocking the path to the front door. The wiry one moved to the hallway, cutting off the back exit. "You took something that does not belong to you. My employer is very unhappy. He wants the bag, and he wants you in a car. Right now." Sloan's mind raced. She had been found. Somehow, despite the ditched phone, the cut hair, the cash purchases, the careful avoidance of cameras, they had found her. In 3 weeks, across 3 states, to a diner in a town that nobody had ever heard of. That was not luck. That was not resources. That was information. Someone had told them where she was. She spoke loudly, making sure old Peyton in the corner could hear every word. "I grabbed the wrong bag at the bus station. It was an accident. I will give it back, but I am not getting in a car with you." "That is not how this works," Rafferty said. "Then we have a problem, because there is an old man right there with a phone and the police station is 5 minutes away. You want to add kidnapping to whatever your boss is already wanted for." It was a calculated bluff. She did not know if Brierwood even had a police station, but she was buying seconds, stretching the moment her eyes flicking to Peyton in the corner. The old man had stopped eating his pie. He was watching his weathered face tight with alarm, one gnarled hand already reaching into his coat pocket for his phone. Rafferty's dead eyes narrowed. He was not used to resistance. He was especially not used to it from a teenage girl. Last chance, princess. Get up, bring the bag, and walk out that door. Or this gets ugly. Sloan stared at him. She did not move. No, she said. The word hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Rafferty's hand shot forward. He grabbed Sloane's wrist across the table, his fingers digging into her skin with a grip that felt like a vice made of bone. He yanked her forward, pulling her half out of the booth. Pain lanced up her arm. Her coffee cup toppled, spilling across the table in a dark flood. I was not asking, he hissed. Behind the counter, Caleb Wren stopped breathing. He had watched the whole thing unfold with a growing dread that started in his stomach and climbed into his throat like something alive. He knew he should stay out of it. These men were dangerous. Clearly dangerous. The kind of dangerous that did not exist in Brierwood, that came from a world Caleb had only seen in movies and news reports. The world of men with dead eyes and expensive shoes and the casual willingness to hurt. The smart thing, the safe thing, was to duck into the back office, call 911, and hide behind the fryer until the police arrived. That was what any reasonable person would do. That was what his mother would want him to do. Stay safe, Caleb. Do not be a hero. Heroes end up in hospitals. But then he saw Rafferty grab her wrist. He saw the pain flash across her face, quickly smothered, because she was too proud or too stubborn to give Rafferty the satisfaction of seeing her hurt. And he saw her eyes. It was not just fear, it was the look of someone who knew with cold certainty that if she walked out that door, she was never coming back. It was the look of someone about to vanish. Caleb Wren did not think. He did not calculate the odds. He did not weigh the risks or consider the consequences. He did not ask himself whether this was smart or brave or stupid. He just moved. He vaulted over the counter. It was a move he had imagined 100 times during long, boring shifts, hands on the formica, swing the legs over land on the other side. He had never actually done it before. His sneaker caught the edge of a coffee pot and sent it crashing to the floor in an explosion of glass and brown liquid, but he stuck the landing. He put himself between Sloan and Rafferty. His chest was heaving. His hands were shaking. He was holding a dirty dish rag in one fist like it was a weapon, a sword, a shield, something more than what it was. Let her go. His voice cracked on the second word. He was terrified. Every nerve in his body was screaming at him to run, to hide, to be invisible again. But his feet were planted on the checkered floor, and he was not moving. He was not moving because something deeper than fear, something that lived in the marrow of who he was, would not let him stand behind a counter while a girl was taken. Rafferty stared at him. For a long moment, the diner was completely silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the rain hammering on the roof. Then Rafferty laughed. It was a cold, dry sound like stone scraping together. Look at this. The busboy wants to play hero. He released Sloane's wrist and turned his full attention to Caleb, his dead eyes measuring the boy the way a wolf measures prey. Go pour some coffee, kid. This is grown-up business. Let her go, Caleb said again. Louder this time. Steadier. I'm calling the police, old. Peyton shouted from the corner. His hands were shaking, but he had his phone out and was jabbing at the screen with arthritic fingers. That was the trigger. Rafferty moved fast, faster than Caleb expected. He pulled a collapsible baton from inside his jacket and flicked it open with a sharp metallic snap. The sound alone was enough to make Caleb's blood go cold, a mechanical click that promised pain the way a cocking hammer promises death. But Rafferty did not go for the old man. He swung at Caleb. The baton caught Caleb on the forearm with a crack that echoed through the diner. Pain exploded up his arm, white-hot and searing, like someone had pressed a branding iron against his bone. He gasped, staggering back. But he did not go down. Adrenaline, raw and animal, surged through him like electricity. He shoved Rafferty backward with both hands, hard. Harder than he knew he could push. Rafferty stumbled, genuinely surprised by the force. Get him! He snapped at his men. Run! Caleb yelled at Sloan. Go out the back. Sloan scrambled out of the booth, grabbing the bag. But the wiry man was blocking the hallway, and one of the heavy-set thugs was lunging toward her from the side. Caleb threw himself at the closest man, the one going for Sloan. They crashed into a table, sending salt shakers, a napkin holder, and bottles of ketchup and mustard flying. Glass shattered. Condiments sprayed across the floor. Caleb fought with everything he had, wild and desperate throwing punches that had no technique but plenty of fury. He caught the man square on the jaw with a right hook that surprised them both. The thugs stumbled, momentarily stunned, but there were four of them, and they were professionals. Sloan did not run. She could have. The hallway was momentarily clear while the wiry man rushed to help his friends with Caleb. She could have sprinted out the back door into the rain in the dark and disappeared. She had spent 3 weeks running. She was good at it. But she watched Caleb, this skinny kid she had known for 15 minutes, fighting three men twice his size because he could not stand by while someone was taken. He was getting beaten badly. A fist caught him in the ribs. A knee drove into his thigh. He kept swinging, kept fighting, but he was losing ground fast. Sloan made a decision. She grabbed the nearest heavy object she could find. A full glass bottle of ketchup, the old-fashioned kind, thick and heavy. She gripped it by the neck, swung it with both hands, and brought it crashing down on the back of the nearest thug's skull. The bottle did not break like in the movies. It connected with a dull, wet thud that vibrated up her arms. The man crumpled, instantly hitting the floor like a sack of wet cement. But the distraction cost Caleb his focus. He turned toward the sound for a fraction of a second. That was when Rafferty came from behind. He had put the baton away. In his hand now was a knife. A 6-inch switchblade with a matte black handle, the blade catching the harsh fluorescent light. Sloan saw it first. "No," she screamed. Caleb turned. Too late and not enough. The blade punched into his side just below the ribs on the left. It went in deep. Sloan heard the sound, a wet, intimate sound that she would hear in her nightmares for years to come. The sound of steel entering flesh, of something being broken that could never be fully repaired. Caleb gasped. The air left his lungs all at once like someone had ripped the plug out of a balloon. He looked down at the knife in Rafferty's hand still buried in his side, and his expression was not pain. It was surprise. Pure, uncomprehending surprise, as if his body had not yet informed his brain what had happened. Rafferty pulled the blade free. The blood came immediately dark, fast, terrifyingly warm. It soaked through Caleb's flannel shirt and spilled over his hand as he clutched his side. He fell to his knees, then to his back. The diner floor was cold against his skin, a mosaic of shattered glass, spilled ketchup, and his own blood spreading in a slow, dark pool. Rafferty kicked him once in the chest with cold efficiency. Caleb's head cracked against the tile. "Stupid kid," Rafferty spat. Sirens. Distant, but closing. Old Peyton had gotten through. "Cops," the wiry man hissed, eyes darting to the window. "We got to go. Leave her. Too much heat now." Rafferty looked at Sloan, then he looked at the boy bleeding on the floor. Something ugly and satisfied flickered in those dead eyes. He pointed at Sloan with the bloody knife. "This is not over. Tell your daddy we are coming for the bag, and for the rest." They bolted. All four of them, one half dragging the man Sloan had hit with the bottle, sprinting through the front door and piling into a black Chevy Tahoe that peeled out of the parking lot just as the first red and blue lights appeared through the rain. Then they were gone. And the silence that followed was worse than the violence, because silence is where the consequences live. Sloan was on her knees beside Caleb before the echo of the Tahoe's tires had faded. The floor was a war zone. Glass, ketchup, mustard, and blood. So much blood. It was spreading faster than she had thought possible, pooling around his body, soaking into the knees of her jeans warm against her skin. Caleb's face was gray. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring at the flickering fluorescent light above him. His breathing was shallow, rapid, each breath a thin whistle that sounded wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. Sloan did not panic. She had grown up in clubhouses where men came in bleeding from bar fights and worse. She had watched her father's emetics stitch wounds on kitchen tables while the television played in the background. She knew the basics. She ripped off her leather jacket, balled it up, and pressed it against the wound in Caleb's side with both hands, leaning her full weight into it. "Stay with me," she said. Her voice was calm, forceful, the voice of a girl who had decided that this boy was not going to die on her watch. "Stay with me, Caleb. Look at me. Do not close your eyes." Caleb blinked. His gaze drifted to her face. He coughed and blood flecked his lips. Pink, frothy. That was bad. Sloan knew it was bad. It meant the blade had gone deep enough to reach the lungs or close to them. "You are okay," Caleb whispered. His voice was barely there, a dry rasp like dead leaves on concrete. "They did not take you," No, Sloan said. Tears were burning her eyes, but she did not let them fall. "Not yet. No, they did not. Because of you, you held the line." Caleb tried to smile. It was lopsided pale, and it broke something inside Sloan that she did not know could break. Good, he breathed. That is good. Then his eyes rolled back and his body went slack beneath her hands. Old Peyton was beside her, his gnarled hands pressing a stack of diner napkins against the wound alongside hers. His face was white, but his hands were steady. The hands of a man who had carried mail bags through blizzards for 40 years and knew how to keep going when the world was coming apart. Ambulance is coming, girl. 3 minutes. He is strong. He will make it. Sloan did not take her hands off the wound. She did not look up from Caleb's face. She kept pressure. She kept talking. She told him to hold on. She told him the ambulance was close. She told him she was not going to let him go. She meant it. She meant it more than she had ever meant anything in her 16 years on this earth. 3 minutes felt like 3 hours. The ambulance arrived with the police. Paramedics rushed in, took over, cut away Caleb's shirt, started IV lines. They worked fast, their voices clipped and urgent. They loaded Caleb onto a stretcher and into the back of the ambulance with a speed that told Sloan everything she needed to know about how bad it was. When people moved that fast, it meant there was no time to waste. Sloan stood in the middle of the ruined diner, covered in blood. Caleb's blood. Her leather jacket was soaked dark. Her hands were red up to the wrists. She was shaking not from cold, but from the delayed shock of adrenaline finally releasing its grip. A deputy tried to talk to her. She could not hear him. The sirens were still screaming. She followed the ambulance to the hospital. She walked because her car had a flat tire and nobody had thought to offer her a ride. She walked 2 miles in the rain, carrying the black duffel bag over her shoulder, her boots splashing through puddles that reflected the red and blue lights of patrol cars racing past her toward the diner. She did not feel the rain. She did not feel the cold. She felt only one thing. A burning crystalline resolve that settled into her bones like molten iron cooling into steel. This was her fault. All of it. A boy she had known for 15 minutes was on an operating table because she had walked into his diner carrying a problem she had no right to bring to his door. She could not undo that. She could not take back the knife, but she could make sure it meant something. She could make sure the people who did this answered for it. And she could make sure Caleb Wren did not die in the dark without someone fighting for him the way he had fought for her. The Brierwood County Hospital was a small building, 2 stories brick, with a parking lot that held maybe 40 cars. It was not equipped for what had just come through its doors. The emergency room had 2 bays. The surgical suite was designed for appendectomies, not knife wounds that shredded livers and punctured diaphragms. Dr. Ashford, the lead trauma surgeon, a lean man with silver hair and steady hands, arrived 9 minutes after Caleb, still pulling on his scrubs. The team worked frantically. The knife had lacerated Caleb's liver, nicked his diaphragm, and ruptured his spleen. He was losing blood faster than they could replace it. Sloan sat in the waiting room. The fluorescent lights buzzed above her, casting everything in a flat, sterile white. She was still wearing Caleb's blood. A nurse offered her a change of clothes. She refused. She did not deserve clean clothes, not while he was in there fighting. At 3 in the morning, Dr. Ashford emerged from surgery, looking like a man who had been in a prize fight and only barely won. His scrubs were sweat-soaked. His eyes were bloodshot. The boy made it through surgery, Ashford said, and Sloan's entire body sagged with a relief so physical it was almost violent. But it was close. The blade lacerated his liver and nicked his diaphragm. We had to remove his spleen. He has lost a massive amount of blood. He is in a medically induced coma. What are his chances? 40%, Ashford said. If he does not develop an infection and if his vitals stabilize over the next 48 hours, he has a fighting chance. But I will not lie to you. It is going to be close. 40%, less than a coin flip. Sloan felt the number land in her chest like a stone thrown into still water. Ripples of dread spreading outward. Nora Wren arrived at 3:15. She was a small woman, thin, with tired eyes and hands red and rough from years of hard work. She came in a coat thrown over her nightgown, her hair unbrushed, her face a mask of terror. When she saw Sloan, she froze. "Are you hurt?" Nora asked, because that was the kind of woman she was. Even in the worst moment of her life, her first instinct was to care for someone else. "No, ma'am," Sloan said. "This is not my blood. It is Caleb's. He saved my life tonight." Nora's face crumbled. She collapsed into a chair, pulling a rosary from her coat pocket. The beads clicked, softly between her fingers. a tiny rhythmic sound that filled the silent waiting room like a heartbeat. Sloan sat down across from her. She could not leave. She tried to explain that help was coming, that the medical bills would be covered. But how do you explain to a terrified mother that a biker army is descending on her town because her son was brave enough to stand up? You do not explain. You just sit with her. You hold the silence. You share the weight. They sat together through the darkest hours of the morning. Two strangers bound together by a boy's courage in a pool of blood on a diner floor. Nora prayed. Sloan watched the clock. The minutes crawled like wounded animals. And then Sloan made the call that changed everything. She had a cheap prepaid phone she had bought in Eugene. She had never used it. She had kept it for one purpose, a phone number she had memorized and sworn she would never dial unless the world was ending. The world was ending. She walked to the corner of the waiting room. She dialed. It rang twice. Yeah. A deep voice. No hello, no greeting. Just a single syllable that sounded like gravel rolling in a cement mixer. Sloan closed her eyes. She had not heard that voice in 3 weeks. It sounded like home. It sounded like safety. And it sounded like everything she had been running from. Daddy, she whispered. The silence on the other end was instant and absolute. It was the silence of a man whose entire body had gone rigid, whose heart had stopped between beats. Sloan, where are you? Are you hurt? No, I'm okay. But Daddy, they found me. Rafferty and his crew, the ones who work for Graves. They tracked me down. I am on my way, Magnus Mercer said. The words came fast, automatic, with the force of a freight train. Wait, Sloan said. And here it was, the moment that separated Sloan from every other club daughter, every other runaway, every other girl who called her father for help. She did not just call for rescue, she set the terms. Daddy, listen to me. A boy saved me tonight. He works at a diner. He is 17 years old. He stepped between me and Rafferty and took a knife from me. He is in surgery right now, and they are telling me he might not make it. He does not know who I am. He does not know who you are. He just saw a girl in trouble and stood up. He bled for me, Daddy. When Magnus spoke again, his voice was different. The sharpness was still there, but beneath it was something raw, something ancient. The voice of a man who understood sacrifice the way a priest understands prayer. What is his name? Caleb. Caleb Wren. Is he still breathing? Barely. You tell the doctors to do everything. You tell them money is no object. You tell them Magnus Mercer is paying every bill. And then she drew the line in the sand. You come for him, not for me, Sloan said. You come because a boy is dying for doing the right thing, and you come within the law. No rivers, no ditches, no disappearances. You come right, or you do not come at all. The pause was long. She could hear him breathing. She could hear faintly the sound of boots on concrete. He was already moving. You do not give me orders, Sloan. I am not giving you an order. I am asking you to be the man I used to believe you were. Another pause. Longer, we are coming, Magnus said. All of us. The line went dead. Sloan lowered the phone. Her hand was shaking. She looked at Detective Harlan Finch, a tired-looking man with thinning hair and a nicotine stain on his index finger, who had arrived to take her statement and was watching her from across the room with a mixture of suspicion and unease. Who was that? Finch asked. Your father. Sloan nodded. Is he coming to pick you up? Sloan looked out the window at the dark, empty parking lot. The rain had not stopped. It streamed down the glass in silver rivulets, distorting the glow of the streetlights. He is coming, Sloan said quietly. But he is not coming alone. It started around 5:30. The first hint of gray light was touching the eastern sky just enough to separate the mountains from the clouds. Deputy Harris was parked on Route 9, drowsy, half asleep in his cruiser, the radar gun in his lap. He was not watching for what came instead. He felt it before he heard it. A tremor. Subtle at first, like a heavy truck on a nearby road. The coffee in his cup holder rippled. The rearview mirror vibrated. Then came the sound. It started low, a drone, like a swarm of hornets far away. But it grew. It deepened. It turned into a roar that was not a roar, but a thunder. A rolling, continuous thunder that shook the windows of his cruiser and rattled the fillings in his teeth. V-twin engines, the distinctive, syncopated heartbeat of American iron. Not one, not 10, hundreds. Harris looked in his side mirror. His jaw dropped. Cresting the hill 2 miles back, a wall of headlights appeared. They stretched across both lanes of the highway, three abreast, running lights blazing like the eyes of an advancing army. The lead bike was a massive custom Harley Road King, blacked out with ape-hanger handlebars, and a rider who looked less like a man and more like a monument carved from granite and leather. Harris fumbled for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Harris on Route 9. We have a situation." By the time the sun fully broke over the ridge, the roar had consumed Brierwood. Citizens waking for work peered through their curtains and saw something out of a fever dream. A river of black leather and polished chrome rolling down Main Street, shaking the autumn leaves from the trees, rattling the windows of the hardware store, drowning out the church bells that rang at 6 every morning. They turned onto Elm Street toward the hospital. Sloan heard them before she saw them. She was standing at the window of the waiting room. Nora was asleep in the chair behind her, finally claimed by exhaustion. The first light of dawn was coloring the sky in shades of ash and steel. Then the glass began to vibrate. The sound rose from the earth like something alive. A rumble that grew into a growl that grew into a roar that shook the pictures on the walls. Sloan pressed her hand against the window. She felt the vibration through her palm, through her bones. They came around the corner in a wave. Row after row of motorcycles' headlights, blazing chrome gleaming in the early light. They filled the parking lot. They spilled onto the street. They lined the sidewalks. 200 machines, 200 men arranged in perfect rows like soldiers on a parade ground. At the front, the massive Road King killed its engine. The silence that followed was deafening. 200 engines cut out in a wave, one after another, the silence spreading through the formation like a held breath. Magnus Ironjaw Mercer dismounted. He was 6'4", with a beard like steel wool, and arms thick as oak branches covered in ink that told stories of roads and brotherhood and a life lived outside the lines. He took off his helmet and hung it on the handlebar. He walked straight toward the sliding glass doors. Behind him, 200 men dismounted and stood in ranks, silent arms crossed, waiting. Inside the waiting room, Sloan watched her father push through the doors. He filled the room with his presence the way a thunderstorm fills a valley. Nurses froze. An orderly dropped a clipboard. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to quiet. His eyes found Sloan. "Daddy," she said. She did not run to him. She stood her ground because that was what she had promised herself she would do. She would not collapse into his arms like a little girl, not now. Not after everything she had done to prove she was more than that. But Magnus crossed the room in 3 strides and wrapped her in his arms anyway. For one moment, the mask slipped. He was not a club president. He was not Iron Jaw. He was a father who had not slept in 3 weeks, who had torn the West Coast apart, looking for his daughter, who had driven through the night fueled by nothing but terror and love. He held her so tight she could not breathe. She let him, just for a moment. Then she pulled back. "I am okay," she said, looking up at him with those fierce storm cloud eyes. But he is not. Room 304, his name is Caleb Wren, 40% chance. His mother is right there. Magnus released Sloan. He turned. His eyes found Nora Wren, who had been jolted awake by the noise and was now standing trembling, backed against the wall, clutching her rosary as if it were the only thing between her and the end of the world. Magnus walked over to her. The leather of his cut creaked with every step. His boots were heavy on the linoleum. He was a terrifying figure, a mountain of muscle and ink and scars, and Nora was shaking so hard the rosary beads were clicking. He stopped in front of her. He slowly removed his sunglasses. His eyes were red-rimmed from the wind and the worry and the long night ride, but they were kind. Unexpectedly, unmistakably kind. He went down on one knee. The president of the Iron Saints knelt on the scuffed linoleum floor of a county hospital in front of a cleaning lady in a nightgown. "Ma'am," Magnus said. His voice was a low rumble, but it was gentle, reverent. "My name is Magnus Mercer. Your son saved my little girl's life last night." Nora stared at him. She could not speak. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. "There is no debt I can pay that equals what he did." Magnus continued, "But I promise you this. Your boy is under my protection now. He is under the protection of the Iron Saints. The men who did this to him, we are going to find them." He stood and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "And God help them," Magnus said, "because the police will not be able to." Sloan watched from across the room. She watched her father kneel before a stranger. And she saw something she had not seen in years. She saw the man she used to believe in, the man who built his kingdom not on fear but on a code. Loyalty earned debts paid, the weak protected by the strong. She had set the terms. He had met them so far, but the sun was barely up, and the hardest part was still coming. By noon, the town held its breath and waited. The Iron Saints had settled over Brierwood like an occupying army, quiet and disciplined, but unmistakably present. The bikers rotated shifts. Some slept in the waiting room stretched across plastic chairs. Others patrolled the hallways in pairs. The nurses and staff adapted with the resigned practicality of people who had no choice. The bikers were polite, said please and thank you, held doors open, and kept their voices down near patient rooms. It was by all accounts the most courteous occupation in history. Magnus had not moved from the ICU waiting area. Dr. Ashford delivered the morning update. Caleb had made it through the night. Vital stabilizing. Critical 48 hours ahead. Magnus demanded whatever resources the boy needed and ordered Boone, his sergeant-at-arms, a wiry man with a shaved head and a scar from his left ear to his chin, to set up a fund for the Wren family. Mortgage, utilities, food, everything. Nora Wren would not worry about a single bill. Then Sheriff Dale Guthrie arrived with his deputies and Detective Harlan Finch, and the confrontation that followed was as inevitable as it was one-sided. Guthrie demanded the bikers leave. Magnus pointed out they were parked legally and had found the abandoned getaway vehicle before the police had. A black Chevy Tahoe, stolen plates out of Salem, ditched on a logging road off Route 4. Sloan watched the exchange from down the hallway. She watched Detective Finch, and she noticed something that nobody else seemed to see. When Boone announced they had found the Tahoe, Finch did not react with surprise. He reacted with calculation. The micro-expression of a man who already knew where the vehicle was, but had chosen not to find it. She filed that away. She did not yet know what it meant, but she would. After the police retreated, Sloan waited until her father was occupied with his war council and Nora had fallen asleep again. Then she took the duffel bag to a small administrative office on the first floor, borrowed a laptop from a kind nurse named Ruth, and plugged in the flash drive. The drive contained 3 files: a spreadsheet, a PDF, a video. She opened the spreadsheet first. It took her less than 30 seconds to understand what she was looking at, and when she did, the blood drained from her face. It was a ledger. Dates, names, amounts. Payments made by Edmund Graves to law enforcement officers, city officials, judges, and federal agents across 3 states: Oregon, Washington, and Nevada. The amounts ranged from $5,000 to $200,000. The dates went back 4 years, dozens of names, some she recognized from news reports: a state senator, a Port Authority director, a DEA supervisor. Then a name jumped off the screen and hit her like a fist: Detective Harlan Finch, Brierwood County Sheriff's Department. Monthly payments of $3,000, 4 years running. Last payment dated 6 days ago. The room tilted. The detective investigating Caleb saw stabbing the man who had tried to take her statement. The man who was right now processing the Tahoe was on Edmund Graves' payroll. Everything Finch learned went straight back to Graves. The investigation was compromised from the inside. She kept scrolling. The second name was worse: Darren Ledger. Prospect Iron Saints MC, Northern Nevada chapter. Payments of $10,000 quarterly, 18 months. Sloan stared at the screen until the letters blurred. Ledger. She knew him. 22 years old, eager, one of the new prospects her father had been grooming for full membership. He had been at the clubhouse in Reno the night she left. He had been one of the men assigned to watch over her. He knew her habits, her favorite bus routes, the Greyhound stations she had mentioned wanting to visit. He had fed her location to Graves's people. He was the reason Rafferty had found her in a diner in a town that nobody had ever heard of. She opened the PDF. Financial routing numbers, shell companies, wire transfers, totaling hundreds of millions of dollars. This was the entire digital skeleton of Edmund Graves's money laundering operation. She closed the laptop. She did not open the video file. She had seen enough. Sloan sat in the quiet office and thought. Her first instinct was to go to Magnus, but she knew her father. If she told him that Ledger had betrayed the club, had sold out his daughter, Ledger would disappear. A logging road, a shallow grave. And if that happened, the evidence would be tainted. Lawyers would argue fabrication. Graves would walk free. The evidence needed to be exposed cleanly, legally, through a process that would hold up in a courtroom. She slipped the flash drive into her jeans pocket and went to find Ledger. He was in the hospital cafeteria sitting alone picking at a sandwich. His prospect cut looked like it did not fit him properly, and his eyes were nervous. When Sloan sat down across from him, something flickered across his face. Guilt. She confronted him directly. She laid out the facts. She watched his composure shatter. He confessed. They said nobody would get hurt, he whispered through his fingers. They said they would grab the bag and let you go. I did not know about the knife. She recorded every word on her prepaid phone. 27 minutes of confession. Then she took the recording to Boone and explained why Magnus could not know yet. Boone handled it. Ledger lost his cut. He was put on a bus. He did not come back. After Boone disappeared down the stairwell, Sloan walked to the restroom at the end of the hallway. She locked the door. She stood at the sink and looked at the stranger in the mirror. Short hair, dark circles, a smear of dried blood on her neck. And then it hit her. All of it. The knife going into Caleb's side. The sound, the blood on her hands, the walk in the rain, Nora's face, Ledger's confession. The weight of the flash drive in her pocket. She gripped the edge of the sink. Her knuckles went white. The sob came from somewhere deep, somewhere she had sealed shut 3 weeks ago. It tore through her chest like a fist. She pressed her hand over her mouth, muffling the sound because even now, even alone, she could not bring herself to let the world hear her break. She cried for 2 minutes. Exactly 2 minutes. She timed it the way you time a wound that needs to drain before you stitch it shut. She let the pain come, let it wash through her, let it shake her body and blur her vision. Then she turned on the faucet, splashed cold water on her face, wiped her eyes, breathed. Enough, she said to her reflection. Not harsh, not cold, just the quiet, resolute command of a girl who had given herself permission to be human for 120 seconds and was now choosing to be a fortress again. She unlocked the door and walked back into the hallway. Sloan sat with Caleb in the ICU that afternoon. He looked impossibly young against the white sheets, the tubes, the IV lines, the monitors. A landscape of fragility, but his chest rose and fell with a rhythm that was steady. Steady was alive. She held his hand. His fingers were cold but warming. She told him she was going to fix this. I do not know if you can hear me, she said quietly, but what you did matters. It was not wasted. You stood up for a stranger, and that stranger is going to make it count. I promise. She squeezed his hand and thought she felt the faintest pressure in return. She chose to believe it was real. Then she heard the footsteps in the hallway and something prickled at the base of her skull. 2 people walking. Their footsteps were wrong. Sharp, crisp, the click of hard-soled dress shoes on linoleum. Hospital staff wore soft-soled shoes, sneakers, clogs. These shoes were Italian leather, polished, expensive. And beneath the loose scrub pants of the man on the right, a bulge at the ankle, a holster. Cleaners. Graves had sent cleaners to finish what Rafferty started. Sloan acted fast. She texted Boone. She moved Nora to a locked restroom. Then she stepped into the doorway of room 304 with her phone recording and confronted the 2 men. Their disguise fell apart under scrutiny. Scrubs still creased from packaging. Stock photo ID badges. Dead professional eyes that belonged in a war zone, not a hospital corridor. Hendricks and Briggs, a nomad who had been a Marine Corps sniper, came through the stairwell door like an avalanche. 8 seconds. No shots fired. 2 men on the floor, zip-tied, a suppressed pistol skittering across the linoleum. Sloan stopped recording. She had evidence. Clear video faces, visible weapon, and frame timestamp in the corner. She told Boone to hold them for the FBI, not the local police, not Finch. She tapped her pocket where the flash drive sat. Detective Finch is compromised. He is on Graves's payroll. Everything goes federal or everything falls apart. Then she went to Magnus and told him all of it. The flash drive, the ledger, Finch Ledger's betrayal, the cleaners. She told him like a field commander delivering a briefing. Facts, clear, unadorned. Magnus listened. The fury built behind his eyes like pressure behind a dam. When she mentioned Ledger, a vein in his temple pulsed. When she mentioned the cleaners, his fists became sledgehammers. He should be in the ground, Magnus said about Ledger. And if he were, the flash drive evidence would be compromised, Sloan replied. Every lawyer Graves hires would argue the data was fabricated. Ledger walking away clean keeps the evidence clean. Magnus stared at his daughter. He was seeing her for the first time, not as his little girl, not as the princess of the Iron Saints, as a strategist, as a leader. She told him the plan. Use Rafferty to lure Graves to the abandoned sawmill off Route 4. Floodlights, not guns. Beanbag rounds, not bullets. Restrain them, then call the FBI. Caleb did not stab anyone, Sloan said, and her voice cracked. He did not pull a gun. He just stood up. He stood up, Daddy. And if you go out there and beat Rafferty to death or throw Graves in a river, you are betraying everything that boy represents. Magnus's eyes were wet. He would deny it later. Beanbag rounds, Sloan said. Non-lethal. Everyone goes home breathing. Everyone goes to prison, not to the morgue. Magnus exhaled through his nose. The sound of a bull being told to stand down. Non-lethal. Fine. But if they shoot first, we finish it, Fair Sloan said. At 6:45 that evening, Boone and 4 nomads brought Rafferty to the hospital basement. The motel room breach took 15 seconds. Rafferty sat in a folding chair, his scorpion tattoo distorted by bruises, his dead eyes alive for the first time with something that looked like fear. Sloan sat across from him and laid out his options. Call Graves and lure him to the sawmill, or face 25 to life as a co-conspirator with no one to cut a deal with. Rafferty calculated. Gears turned, exits closed. He made the call. Midnight Graves agreed. Before she left the hospital, Sloan stopped at room 304 one last time. She stood over Caleb's bed and memorized his face. The shaggy hair pushed back by a nurse. The bandages, white against white. I am going to do something tonight that scares me more than anything I have ever done, she said. But I keep thinking about you, about the way you jumped over that counter with nothing but a dish rag. You did not have a plan. You did not have backup. You just moved. Because it was right. So I am going to move too. And when you wake up, this is going to be over. All of it. I promise. She touched his hand. His skin was warm, warmer than it had been that afternoon. She walked out without looking back. The old Brierwood sawmill sat on a high bluff overlooking the Deschutes River Fork, a skeletal ruin of rusted corrugated metal and rotting timber that had been surrendering to the Oregon elements for decades. The main warehouse was a vast cathedral-like space, 2 stories of open floor, beneath a lattice of steel catwalks and overhead beams. The roof was half gone, stripped by winter storms letting in the sky and the rain. Sloan arrived at 9:33 hours early. She had drawn the layout on a napkin. She had identified catwalks, machinery positions, blind spots, choke points. She had calculated sight lines and positioned 6 high-intensity construction lamps, each capable of throwing 14,000 lumens. She had made Boone repeat the plan twice and corrected him when he got a detail wrong. She was 16 years old and she was commanding a military operation. The nomads moved through the sawmill like ghosts. Several were former military. 2 had done tours in Afghanistan. Briggs, the Marine Corps sniper, knew how to set an ambush the way a surgeon knows how to hold a scalpel. They rigged the floodlights in the rafters wired to a single switch that Sloan would hold from the catwalk 30 feet above the floor. Each man carried a shotgun loaded with beanbag rounds. Each man also carried a sidearm with hollow points in case the world stopped listening to good intentions. Magnus took his position at midnight. He stood alone in the center of the warehouse, a solitary figure in the vast, dark space lit by a single work lamp that cast his shadow across the debris like a sundial marking the final hours. Rafferty sat tied to a chair behind him, gagged and bruised a prop in the final act. Sloan climbed to the catwalk at 11:45. The metal rungs were slick with rain and rust. She crouched behind the railing, the floodlight switch in her left hand, her phone in her right. She looked down at her father standing alone in the dark and felt a terror so profound it nearly buckled her knees. If this went wrong, he would be first in the crossfire. She pushed the fear down, locked it away. There would be time for fear later. Right now, there was only the plan. At 12:07, Boone's voice crackled in her earpiece. 2 SUVs, black Cadillac Escalades. Armored, military grade. Sloan's stomach dropped. She had planned for 4, maybe 5 men, not armored vehicles and professional soldiers. Hold positions. Nobody moves until I say. The Escalades rolled through the loading bay door like hearses, dark and deliberate. They stopped 20 yards from Magnus. 6 men stepped out. Not street criminals, private military contractors. They moved with fluid, lethal economy, checking corners, scanning darkness, suppressed carbines at the low ready, night vision goggles atop their heads. Then Edmund Graves stepped out. He was a disappointing figure. Small, slight, wearing a charcoal wool overcoat that probably cost more than Nora Wren made in 6 months. Thin hands, wire-rimmed glasses, the fastidious manner of a man who viewed the world as a series of transactions. He held a black umbrella over his head, fussy and precise, even in a ruin. "You are not," Rafferty Graves said. His voice was bored. "Rafferty is indisposed. I am the father." Graves sighed. He checked his cuticles. "The biker. I was hoping to avoid this. It is all so theatrical." He gestured to his men with a lazy wave, the way someone might gesture to a waiter. "Kill him. Find the girl. Find the drive. Burn the building. I have a flight to catch." 6 rifles rose. 6 red laser sights converged on Magnus's chest. Sloan's hand tightened on the switch. "Now," she said. She threw the switch. The warehouse exploded with light. 84,000 lumens, all directed downward, turning the darkness into a blinding white inferno. The mercenaries' eyes, adjusted to near total darkness, were hit with a wall of light that was physically painful. 2 stumbled backward. 1 dropped to a knee. The night vision goggles caught the reflected glare and became instruments of additional disorientation. The nomads moved, fast and hard, from behind the machinery, from the shadows, from positions the mercenaries had not been able to check because Sloan had placed the lights to create specific blind spots. 2 beanbag rounds dropped the first mercenary. A second went down the same way. But the remaining 4 adapted in seconds. Combat veterans. Training kicked in through the shock. 2 dropped behind the armored escalades and began returning fire. Controlled aimed bursts. The suppressed carbines made a sound like angry whispers. Rounds sparked off machinery, shattered a floodlight, sent debris flying. Then the sound Sloan had been dreading. A cry of pain from the shadows. Briggs. A round caught him in the thigh as he advanced along the east wall. He went down, dragging himself behind a steel column, blood soaking through his jeans. His jaw was clenched, his hands pressing against the wound. Below her, Magnus charged a mercenary who had come around the escalade. 240 pounds, propelled by fury. He lowered his shoulder and hit the man like a freight train, slamming him into the vehicle hard enough to dent the armored panel. But the mercenary fired as he was being hit. A round tore through Magnus's leather cut and carved a furrow across his left shoulder. Magnus roared, not in pain, in anger. He grabbed the stunned mercenary and hurled him into the concrete floor. More mercenaries went down. But the last 2 found cover behind a concrete pillar near the loading bay, laying down disciplined fire that pinned 2 nomads behind a bandsaw housing. The situation was stuck. Briggs bleeding, Magnus bleeding. A stalemate in a fight that needed to end fast. But Sloan could see the 2 mercenaries from the catwalk. She was directly above and behind their position. They did not know she was there. She crawled along the wet metal grating, reached the nearest floodlight, grabbed the housing, felt the heat radiating through the casing, and twisted. The beam swept across the wall and hit the 2 mercenaries full in the face from their unprotected flank. They flinched. One raised his arm, a half-second opening. Hendricks came around the pillar like a landslide, clothesline to the first. Boone swung his baton against the second man's forearm, then his knee, then his helmet. The man went limp. Silence. The fight was over. Less than 90 seconds, but it had felt like an hour. Sloan keyed her radio about Briggs. "Through and through," Boone reported. "Missed the artery. He is going to make it, but he needs a hospital. Get him out. Take the van. Go now." 2 nomads carried Briggs toward the loading bay. He was conscious, jaw clenched, one hand raised in a fist as he passed the other men. The nomads salute, still fighting. Sloan watched them go and felt the weight of command settle into her bones. She had ordered men into a fight. One of them was bleeding because of her plan. That weight would never fully lift. Magnus walked toward Graves, who had not run, had not fought, had simply stood beside his escalade in paralyzed disbelief, his umbrella gone, his expensive coat spattered with rain and concrete dust, his glasses crooked. The look of a man whose world had been rearranged without his permission. Magnus grabbed Graves by the collar. Graves tried to speak. "You cannot. I have immunity. I have files. I know people." "Shut up," Magnus said. Not loudly, just final. He dragged Graves through the loading bay out into the rain to the edge of the bluff overlooking the river. The water far below was swollen by days of rain, a constant churning roar. The drop was 80 feet. The current was fast, dark, merciless. Magnus pushed Graves to the edge. The smaller man stumbled, nearly going over. He caught himself and looked down at the black water. "Please," Graves said. The word came out thin and high-stripped of every pretense. The naked sound of a man who had finally encountered something his money could not fix. "Please, I can pay you anything." "Name a price." Boone appeared at Magnus's side. He looked at the river, then at Graves, then at Magnus. "River is deep," Boone said quietly. "Current is fast. Nobody would ever find him." Magnus stood at the edge of the bluff, rain streaming down his face, blood running down his arm. He looked at the man who had sent killers after his daughter. The man who had ordered a 16-year-old girl brought in or killed over a flash drive. The man whose greed had put a knife in the side of a 17-year-old kid who was guilty of nothing except courage. He thought about the river. He thought about how easy it would be. One push, a short fall, the cold water and the current. No body, no trial, no lawyers, no appeals. Just gravity and the river and the rain washing everything clean. The old Magnus would have done it. The man he had been 5 years ago, 10 years ago, would not have hesitated. Blood for blood. The books balanced with a body. Then he heard the footsteps behind him. Light footsteps, quick and sure. Sloan appeared at the edge of the loading bay. She was soaked, her short hair plastered to her forehead, her face pale in the rain. She had a cut on her palm from the floodlight housing, blood running between her fingers and mixing with the rainwater. She walked toward her father. She did not run. She did not shout. She walked with the measured, deliberate pace of someone who knew exactly what she was about to do and exactly why. She stopped 3 feet from the edge. "Daddy," Sloan said. Magnus did not look at her. His jaw was locked, his muscles rigid. The rain ran into his eyes and down his beard. "Daddy, look at me." He turned his head just enough to see her. "The boy in that hospital," Sloan said, and her voice was steady despite everything. "He did not kill anyone. He did not break any bones. He did not throw anyone off a cliff. He walked into a fight with armed men carrying nothing but a dish rag. And he won, not because he was stronger, because he was better. He was better than them. And he was better than this." She gestured at the scene. "The bluff, the river, the weeping man at the edge. If you throw him off that cliff, you prove every person who ever called you a thug right. Every cop, every prosecutor, every reporter who said the Iron Saints are just criminals with motorcycles. And you prove Caleb wrong. You prove that standing up, doing the right thing, bleeding for a stranger, none of it matters. Because in the end, the biggest fist wins." Magnus stared at her. His eyes were burning, not from the rain, from something deeper, something tearing through walls he had built over decades. "He ordered them to kill you," Magnus said. His voice was raw, broken in places he did not know could break. He sat in his car and said the words, "Kill her like you were nothing, like my baby girl was a line item on a ledger." "I know," Sloan said. "And that is why this has to go to court. That is why the world has to hear those words. Not in a river, not in the dark. In a courtroom. On the record. Where it counts." She took a step closer. Close enough to touch him. "If you do this, I lose you. Not because you go to prison, because I will never be able to look at you the same way again. And I just got you back, Daddy. I just started seeing the man I used to believe in. Do not take that away from me." The silence between them was absolute. Even the rain seemed to hold its breath. Magnus looked at his daughter. He looked at Graves. He looked at the river. He released his grip. Graves collapsed onto the wet ground, gasping, curling into himself like a child waking from a nightmare. His expensive coat ruined, his glasses gone fallen into the mud. He wept without sound, his body shaking. Magnus stepped back from the edge. He turned away from the river and faced his daughter. The rain ran between them like a curtain. "Call the sheriff," Magnus said. His voice was quiet now, drained. The voice of a man who had just fought the hardest battle of his life and won by not throwing a single punch. "Tell him we have a present for the FBI." Sloan pulled out her phone and dialed the Portland FBI field office's 24-hour tip line. She identified herself. She described the money laundering operation. She listed the contents of the flash drive. She gave the coordinates of the sawmill. She told them to send a team quickly. She answered 3 questions and hung up. Boone zip-tied Graves's hands behind his back. The nomads loaded the unconscious mercenaries into the Escalades. The Iron Saints vanished into the night on silent engines. By the time Sheriff Guthrie and the state police arrived, followed 30 minutes later by 2 black SUVs from the FBI's Portland office, the warehouse was empty of bikers. All that remained were 6 zip-tied mercenaries on their knees, a battered Rafferty still tied to his chair, and Edmund Graves sitting in the mud with a flash drive taped to his forehead with duct tape. Sloan's idea. She thought it added a certain poetic symmetry. The drive back to the hospital was quiet. Sloan sat in the van, her head leaning against the cold metal wall, her eyes closed. The adrenaline was draining out of her body, leaving behind an exhaustion so complete it felt like her bones were dissolving. Magnus sat across from her, his shoulder field dressed, wrapped in gauze. It would need stitches, but he had refused treatment until Sloan was safe. "You were right," Magnus said into the darkness of the van. Sloan opened her eyes. About all of it. Ledger, Finch, the plan, the river, about Caleb, about what he represents. He looked at his scarred knuckles, the tattoos covering his arms, the leather cut that had defined his identity for 3 decades. "I have spent my whole life living by a code. Loyalty, strength, blood for blood. And I thought that was enough. I thought that was what made a man. But that kid in the hospital, he never lived by any code. He never swore any oath. He just saw someone in trouble and stood up. No backup, no army, no plan. Just him and a dish rag and more guts than any man I have ever known." He looked at Sloan. His eyes were wet. "You asked me to be the man you used to believe in. I do not know if I am that man, Sloan, but I am going to try." Sloan reached across the van and took her father's hand. His fingers were rough, scarred, calloused from decades of gripping handlebars and making fists. She held them gently. "That is all I ever wanted," she said. They rode the rest of the way in silence. Father and daughter, the storm and the mountain, connected by something stronger than blood, stronger than code. Connected by the choice to be better. Caleb Wren opened his eyes on a Friday morning. The first thing he saw was the ceiling. White acoustic tiles, each one dotted with tiny holes lit by a fluorescent panel that cast a flat antiseptic glow. The second thing he noticed was the beeping, a steady rhythmic pulse from somewhere to his left. The third thing was the pain. A deep, hot line of fire along his left side from his ribs to his hip, pulsing with every heartbeat. He tried to move. His body rebelled instantly. "Easy," a voice said, soft, urgent, familiar in a way he could not immediately place. "Do not try to move. You have got about 40 stitches and a missing spleen. The doctor said you are supposed to lie still for at least another week." Caleb blinked. He turned his head slowly, carefully, and saw her. Sloan was sitting on the wide windowsill, one knee pulled to her chest. She looked different from the girl who had walked into the diner 4 nights ago. The oversized leather jacket was draped over a chair, laundered, but still carrying a faint shadow of rust brown that no amount of detergent could fully erase. She wore a gray hoodie instead, soft and worn. Her face was clean, her short hair pulled back, and her storm cloud blue eyes were fixed on him with an intensity that made the room feel very small. "You are okay," Caleb said. It was not a question. It was the first thing his brain produced, the thought that had been frozen in place since the moment the world went dark on the diner floor. "Yes," Caleb Sloan said. She smiled, and it was the first genuine, unguarded smile she had allowed herself in weeks. "I am okay. Because of you." "Did I win?" Caleb asked. His voice was a dry crackle, and it hurt to speak, but the corner of his mouth turned up. Sloan let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. "You won. You held the line, and the cavalry came. They are gone, Caleb. Rafferty Graves, all of them. The FBI has them. It is over, good," Caleb whispered. His eyes drifted shut for a moment at the morphine pulling at him. "That is good." Another voice, warm, breaking with emotion. Caleb opened his eyes again. His mother was there. Nora stood beside the bed, her hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. She had not slept in 4 days, had barely eaten, had worn a path in the linoleum between the waiting room and the ICU. But in this moment, with her son's eyes open and focused, She looked like a woman who had just witnessed a resurrection. "Hey, Mom," Caleb said. Nora collapsed forward, wrapping her arms around him as gently as she could, pressing her face into his shoulder, her body shaking with sobs that she had held back through days of terror and prayer. "My boy," she whispered. "My brave, stupid, wonderful boy." Caleb winced at the pressure on his side but did not complain. He held his mother with his free arm and let her cry. After a while, the door opened. The air shifted the way it always did when Magnus Mercer entered a space. Not because he was loud, but because he was a force, and forces did not need to announce themselves. He was not wearing his cut today. Dark t-shirt that strained across his broad chest, heavy denim jeans, left arm in a sling, the shoulder wound bandaged beneath the fabric. But he could not hide what he was. He filled the doorway like a wall. His beard was the color of iron filings. His arms were mapped with ink that told decades of stories. He carried a motorcycle helmet in one hand and a small paper bag in the other. Caleb's eyes widened. "You are him," Caleb rasped. "The dad," I am, Magnus said. His voice was quiet, almost reverent, as if he were entering a church. He walked to the bedside, his boots making barely a sound. He looked down at the bandages, the tubes, the fragility of a 17-year-old kid who worked at a diner and had never been in a fight before the one that nearly killed him. Magnus extended his hand. It was massive, engulfing Caleb's completely. But he did not squeeze. He held the boy's hand with a gentleness that seemed impossible for a man that size. "You saved my world, son," Magnus said. His voice was thick with an emotion he had spent a lifetime suppressing. "There are not words for that. There is not enough money in the world to pay for that. You gave me back my daughter." Caleb looked at the big man, feeling the calluses on his palm, the rough geography of a life lived with fists and handlebars. "I just could not let them take her," he murmured. "He had a knife. She was scared. It was not right." "No," Magnus agreed. "It was not right. And most men would have run. Most men would have hid. You stood up." He released Caleb's hand and reached into his pocket. He pulled out a set of car keys and placed them on the bedside table. "My boys went by your house," Magnus said. "We saw the Taurus in the driveway. Transmission was shot. Head gasket was blown." Caleb winced. "Yeah, I was saving up." "It is fixed," Magnus said. "New transmission, new engine, new paint. We even fixed the AC. It runs better than the day it rolled off the lot." Caleb stared at him. The car he had been trying to fix every Saturday for 8 years. The car his father had left behind like a broken promise wrapped in rusted metal, fixed, running, whole. Then Magnus reached into his other pocket and pulled out a second set of keys. Heavier. The key fob bore the silver shield of Harley-Davidson. "I figured a young man who stared down a knife deserves something with a little more soul," Magnus said. "Something that understands the wind. There is a 2024 Iron 8 8.3 Sportster in your garage. Matte black custom exhaust paid in full. Insurance and registration handled." Caleb looked at the keys in his palm. His throat was tight. His eyes were burning. "I cannot accept this," he whispered. "You are not accepting a gift," Caleb, Magnus said, his tone shifting from warm to solemn. "You are accepting a tribute." He looked at Nora, who was watching from the other side of the bed, her eyes wide with disbelief. "We set up a trust in your name this morning," Magnus said. "Full ride, tuition, books, housing, engineering school, medical school, whatever you choose. The Iron Saints are picking up the tab." Nora covered her mouth. A sound escaped her that was somewhere between a gasp and a prayer. "Mr. Mercer, you do not have to." "I do," Magnus said, cutting her off gently. "He bled for my family. Mrs. Wren, my family will sweat for his. That is the code." He turned back to Caleb. "You are family now, kid. You understand. You have brothers in every state. You ever have trouble, you ever feel unsafe, you make one call, and we answer." Caleb looked at his mother. She was radiant. Her exhaustion and grief transformed into a pride so fierce it seemed to fill the room with light. He looked at Sloan, watching from the windowsill, with a smile that reached her eyes for the first time since they had met. For the first time in his life, Caleb Wren, the invisible boy from Brierwood, the background character in his own town, felt seen. He felt valued. He felt like he mattered. "Thank you," Caleb whispered. Magnus stepped back. He gave the boy a sharp, respectful nod. the kind a commanding officer gives a soldier who has proved himself under fire. No, Magnus said. Thank you. He walked toward the door. He paused in the frame, looked back at Sloan, and something passed between them. A question asked and answered without words. Then he walked out, his boots heavy on the linoleum, leaving the door open behind him. Sloan sat with Caleb for a while after Magnus left. Nora had gone to call her sister to share the good news, to cry happy tears into a phone in the hallway. The room was quiet except for the beep of the monitor and the distant rumble of 200 engines beginning to stir in the parking lot below. They are leaving, Caleb asked, looking toward the window. Yeah, back to the road, back to their lives, and you, the question hung in the air like a held note. Sloan looked out the window at the sea of chrome and leather assembling in formation below. She could see her father's Road King gleaming black in the autumn sun, waiting at the head of the column. She could go with them. She could ride home back to Reno, back to the clubhouse, back to the life she had been born into. Her father would welcome her. The club would celebrate. She would be the president's daughter again, shielded, protected, untouchable. Or she could choose something else. I am not going with them, Sloan said quietly. Caleb looked at her. I am going to stay here for a while. Help your mom while you recover. Get my feet under me. She paused. I am going to enroll in school, finish my diploma, apply to college. College, Caleb blinked. For what? Law, Sloan said, and the word felt right in her mouth, solid and true, like a key turning in a lock. I spent my whole life watching people solve problems with fists and money and fear. I want to learn how to solve them with words, with evidence, with the law. She looked at him, and there was something luminous in her expression, a clarity that came not from desperation, but from conviction. You changed something, Caleb. You did not throw a punch. You did not pull a weapon. You stood in front of a girl with a dish rag and said no. And that was enough. That was more powerful than 200 motorcycles. I want to spend the rest of my life being that kind of powerful. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled. A real smile, wide enough to crease his pale cheeks and make the pain in his side feel very far away. Law school, he said. That is going to make your dad's head explode. Sloan laughed. A real laugh, sudden and bright and surprised. The laugh of a girl who had forgotten she was capable of it. He will survive. He is tough. A knock at the door, soft. Boone stood there holding a black leather vest. He handed it to Sloan without a word and walked away. She brought it back to the bed and held it up so Caleb could see. It was not a full member's cut. It was high-quality leather, clean and new, without the patches and rockers that marked a patched member. But on the left breast, a single patch was stitched in white thread against the black leather, protected by the Iron Saints. My dad left this for you, Sloan said. She draped it over the back of the chair beside Caleb's bed. Wear that and nobody anywhere will ever touch you again. From the parking lot below, the sound began to rise. It started as a low rumble, like the first tremor of an earthquake vibrating through the walls and the floor and the glass. Then it grew, building in layers, engine after engine, joining the chorus, until the sound was a living, breathing force that shook the pictures on the walls and made the water in the pitcher on Caleb's bedside table tremble. 200 engines roared to life in unison. Sloan walked to the window and looked down. The formation was perfect. 3 abreast, stretching back through the parking lot and onto the street. A river of black and chrome flowing toward the highway. At the head, Magnus's Road King rumbled with deep, unmistakable authority. She placed her hand against the glass. She could feel the vibration through her palm, through her bones. Magnus did not look up. He did not wave. He kicked his bike into gear, and the column moved. 200 machines rolling in perfect formation, their pipes singing a song that the town of Brierwood would talk about for generations. They rolled down Elm Street, past the hospital, past the diner that was still closed behind yellow police tape, past the hardware store, and the barber shop in the church. They turned onto Route 9 and headed for the highway, the sound of their engines fading slowly like thunder rolling away after a storm. Sloan watched until the last taillight disappeared beyond the ridge. Then she turned back to the room. Caleb was watching her. His eyes were heavy with morphine, but they were warm. You really are not going, he said. No, Sloan said. She sat back down on the windowsill and pulled her knee to her chest. I am done running, Caleb. I am done hiding. I am done being someone else's story. She looked out the window at the empty road, at the quiet town settling back into its ordinary rhythm, at the pale October sun climbing above the ridge and spilling golden light across the valley. "This is where I start my own," she said. "The legend of Brierwood spread the way all great stories do. In whispers at first, then in louder voices, then in the kind of full-throated telling that happens in diners and barber shops and around fires when the night is long and the audience is willing. They told the story of the boy who stole between a girl and a knife with nothing but a dish rag and his own 2 feet. They told the story of the girl who called an army but commanded it with her conscience. They told the story of the father who knelt before a cleaning lady and chose the law over the river. And they told the story of the night that 200 engines shook a town awake and reminded it what thunder sounds like when it comes to answer courage." Caleb Wren made a full recovery. He graduated from high school, enrolled in engineering school on the Iron Saints scholarship, and eventually opened his own restoration shop in Portland, specializing in classic American muscle cars and vintage motorcycles. The matte black Iron 883 Sportster sat in the front window of his shop for years, polished and gleaming, a reminder he never needed to explain to anyone. The Ford Taurus his father had left behind ran for another 100,000 miles before Caleb finally retired it to the back of the shop, not because it was broken, but because it had done its job. It had taught him that some things are worth fixing even when the world tells you to give up. Sloan Mercer finished high school in Brierwood. She graduated valedictorian. She went to college, then law school. She passed the bar on her first attempt. She never wore the leather again, but she kept a photograph of her father in her office next to a framed menu from Pop's Diner, the one with the coffee ring stain and the ketchup smear that might have been ketchup and might have been something else. She specialized in federal prosecution, and in her first year as an assistant district attorney, she helped bring down a corruption ring that spanned 2 states. The flash drive had been the first domino. She made sure it was not the last. Detective Harlan Finch was among the 19 law enforcement officers indicted in the federal sweep that followed the Graves case. He pleaded guilty to 12 counts of public corruption and was sentenced to 14 years in a federal penitentiary. He never set foot in Brierwood again. Briggs recovered fully from his leg wound. He rode for another 12 years before retiring to a cabin in Montana with a German shepherd named Gunshot in a view of the mountains that stretched all the way to the horizon. He never talked about the sawmill, but on certain nights when the wind was right and the stars were out, he would sit on his porch and listen to the silence, and he would remember the sound of a 16-year-old girl's voice crackling through a cheap radio, saying the word that saved a dozen lives. Now, Magnus Mercer continued to lead the Iron Saints for another decade. He never spoke publicly about what happened in Brierwood, but those closest to him noticed a change after that October. He was quieter, more deliberate. He still commanded with authority, but the authority had shifted from the gravity of a man who could destroy to the gravity of a man who chose not to. He visited Brierwood once a year, always in October, always alone. He would park his Road King outside Pop's Diner, which had reopened under new management with a fresh coat of paint and a working neon sign, and he would sit in the booth where Caleb had served coffee to a girl with storm cloud eyes, and he would drink his coffee black and leave a $100 tip on the table. He never explained why to anyone. He did not need to. Edmund Graves was convicted on 47 federal counts, including money laundering, conspiracy, corruption of public officials, and ordering the attempted murder of a minor. He was sentenced to life without parole. In his sentencing hearing, the judge noted that the evidence against him was among the most comprehensive and cleanly documented he had ever seen. He did not know that the documentation had been managed by a 16-year-old girl standing in a hospital corridor over 2 disarmed assassins, calmly dictating the chain of evidence to a man with a scar from his ear to his chin. Nora Wren quit her second job. She did not need it anymore. She spent her mornings tending a small garden in her backyard and her afternoons volunteering at the hospital where her son had nearly died and been reborn. She never fully understood the world that had descended on her town that October, the chrome and the leather and the men who knelt before her and called her son a hero. But she understood the result. Her boy was alive. Her bills were paid. And a girl named Sloan brought flowers to her kitchen table every Sunday afternoon and called her ma'am, and never once let her forget that Caleb's courage had meant something. They remained close friends for the rest of their lives. Caleb and Sloan bonded by a Tuesday night in October when the world revealed itself in the starkest possible terms. Good and evil, courage and cowardice, the choice to stand or the choice to look away. They never became more than friends, though the people of Brierwood speculated endlessly. The truth was simpler and more profound than romance. They were two people who had seen each other at their most vulnerable and their most brave. And that kind of seeing creates a bond that does not need a name. It just exists steady and true, like the heartbeat of a cardiac monitor, counting the moments of a life that almost ended, but did not. The story of Brierwood reminds us of something important. It reminds us that heroes do not always wear capes or carry badges. Sometimes they wear greasy aprons and drive broken-down sedans. Sometimes they are 16-year-old girls who choose the law over the fist, the courtroom, over the river, the hard right, over the easy wrong. It teaches us that true bravery is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to stand your ground when every nerve in your body is screaming at you to run. And most of all, it reminds us that loyalty, real loyalty, the kind that bleeds and bruises and holds the line, is a currency more valuable than all the gold in the world. And in room 304, where a cardiac monitor once counted the fragile heartbeats of a boy who refused to sit down, the memory of courage lived on. Not in the chrome and thunder that shook the valley, not in the flash drive that brought down an empire, but in the quiet, unshakable truth that one person standing up at the right moment can change everything. The thunder had rolled, the storm had passed, and in its wake, two lives began again, stronger than before, forged in the fire of a single night, when a boy with a dish rag proved that the bravest thing in the world is not the willingness to fight, it is the willingness to stand.